I think the problem that we have is that India prefers backroom deals, quiet diplomacy, and diplomacy behind closed doors. And the United States appears to prefer very public diplomacy and megaphone diplomacy. Having said that, I think India's position has been governed by a strategy which is no confrontation, no capitulation, but yes to conversation. And to me, it seems that is the right strategy to follow. We haven't retaliated to the verbal volley coming out of Washington from Peter Navarro and other guys. So there has been an improvement in climate, as Parikshit said, at the top level. But I'm happy to report conversations never stopped really between the two sides. So my assessment is this is not so much about trade. It is about trade, of course, but it's a lot more. I think we are looking at Russian oil. We are looking at the problem in Ukraine that President Trump is extremely frustrated by Putin and the fact that he's making no progress on the war in Ukraine. It's also a little bit about personal pique, if you like, by President Trump vis-a-vis India for whatever reason. So I think there is a combination of factors at work. I will also tell you that in all the 30 years I dealt with trade, there has always been an impact on trade from geopolitics and domestic politics, but I have never seen geopolitics and domestic politics drive trade talks like this. This is almost like the only thing that matters is not the dollars and cents, which is vital for trade negotiators like me, but essentially geopolitics, domestic politics. What is the MAGA crowd saying? What will domestic audiences think about? What about the poll ratings? What about the midterm elections? So I really think the politicization of trade negotiations is what we are seeing at this moment.
So do you think it's really geopolitics that's really the main driver for how trade talks have now developed? Or do you think it's still down to the U.S. trying to get more manufacturing back to the country, perhaps making the American economy great again? What are your thoughts? Is this now a geopolitical play mostly?
A combination of both, actually. I mean, there is no question that President Trump wants manufacturing to return to the U.S. I mean, the U.S. wants to maintain its primacy vis-a-vis China, and it feels it's losing out on manufacturing, tech, and innovation. So there is no question that that is what is driving it. But the fact is, geopolitics is playing an important role as well. So if the US has to strike a deal with China, if the US has to strike a deal with Russia on the conflict in Ukraine, the US finds it convenient to use trade. In fact, you will recall that even in the India-Pakistan conflict, President Trump claimed that trade had something to do with it somehow. Although the fact of the matter is India and Pakistan trade very little, actually. So I think there is no question that we are looking at an extreme geopoliticization of trade, whichever way you look at it. By the way, I wouldn't just blame the US. If you look at EU and China, they've got tit-for-tat anti-dumping duties or tariff duties on not just electrical vehicles, but also on pig exports, frankly, from EU to China. So China and EU are doing it as well. And you will realize that US, EU, and China are the biggest three trade players in the world. If they are going to go down the route of violating their WTO commitments, MFN commitments, and just impose tariffs the way they want, then I think it augurs badly for the multilateral trading system, which is why I think countries like India, which used to rely on the multilateral trading system, have embarked on a series of FTAs. And that is why, as Parikshit said, we are very, very keen to conclude the FTA with EU so that we can diversify the risk when it comes to our trade relations.
You mentioned Peter Navarro earlier on, Mr. Kumar, and he has been one of the more vociferous critics of India in recent times, even calling you guys the Maharaja of tariffs. But when you look at the fact that some of the things that are key for India, such as protecting the agricultural industry and protecting some other industries, I hate to bring this up and play devil's advocate, but is he completely far off? Is there more for India to give with regards to reducing some of these tariffs that he's claiming are on India's side to create trade more freely?
Firstly, I think the label Maharaja of Tariffs or Tariff King is extremely unfair. I wrote an article for Newsweek in which I broke down the exact applied trade weighted tariffs, and they are just 4.9%. The exceptions, as you say, are agriculture, dairy, and autos. As far as agriculture is concerned, I would describe India as sui generis, and I would make the point to you that no elected government in India can survive if it completely opens up the agriculture market. 50% of the country depends on agriculture directly or indirectly. It's impossible, frankly, to open up the agriculture market, especially to Western farmers, especially in the United States, who are heavily subsidized by their governments. So I don't think that is possible, and that is a clear red line. Autos is a slightly different story. It's a mass employment provider in India, and we've been having jobless growth for some time. So the sector becomes extremely important for provision of jobs. So ag exports are going to be difficult to accept. In the case of autos, what India can contemplate is some kind of tariff rate quota for the luxury vehicle market. That is something that we can accept. If you're selling BMWs and we are going to sell it above $40,000 or $30,000, that is something that India can contemplate. But all other exports of small compact vehicles will be extremely difficult for India to accept. But as I said earlier, this is not so much about trade. My sense is the trade agreement was done. It's almost done, 99% it's over, which is why President Trump is also expressing confidence that the trade agreement can be concluded. I think the problem lies more with India buying Russian oil and other geopolitical factors. So we just have to wait and see how these things play out. I mean, Russia is under pressure, especially after events yesterday vis-a-vis Poland. So we will see how that plays out, but that will have profound consequences for India.
Well, let's talk about Russian crude then, because you mentioned this is the geopolitical tinge that's also driving all of this, really trying to pressure India to wean itself off of this. But as we've seen before, making sure that energy security and affordable energy continues to support Indian growth and ordinary Indians who are most affected by these prices is something that seems to be a bit of a red line for India at the moment. Do you expect that this will actually result in these higher tariffs? Because again, this is a position that India has shown it's difficult to reverse on, just because it's so important to the energy security question that India faces as it tries to maintain its growth.
I would say this is much less of a red line than agriculture or autos, frankly. As far as oil is concerned, we were given to understand by the previous Biden administration that we should go ahead and buy oil from Russia. Otherwise, there would be an enormous increase in Brent crude, which will impact the global economy. So we went ahead and purchased Russian oil, and that was obviously capped at levels that were accepted by the major players. Now, suddenly to expect India to reverse this and bring it down to zero is well nigh impossible. Energy security is important, but I think what roils most Indians is the fact that we are being discriminated against because European Union buys a lot of gas from Russia, and even the United States buys $3 billion. It's not much. $3 billion is a small amount, but even the US purchases palladium, fertilizer, and uranium from Russia for $3 billion. EU trades with Russia to the extent of $70, $80 billion, and India does to the extent of 85, 90. If you think $90 billion purchases of oil by India will bring the conflict in Ukraine to an end, be my guest. Not going to happen. So I really, for example, China, it buys much more oil from Russia than it does India, but China has gotten off very lightly. So those are the things which actually cause a lot of angst in Delhi. But we are trying to keep our cool and trying to negotiate with United States. We will be happy to diversify our energy purchases in the future, but you will have to give us time. This is not a tap that you can just switch off and switch on. We have been buying oil from Russia, no question about it. I think what needs to be done is there needs to be some international consensus. Just saying we should stop buying Russian oil, will there be an impact on the increase in Brent crude prices? If there is an increase in Brent crude, I don't think President Trump or the United States is going to like it with the midterm elections coming on. And that will impact everybody else in the global economy. So this needs to be managed. But on the whole, I would say agriculture and other items are much more of a red line than this one.